Bum 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 bum. Oh, hello. Welcome to another day on the TooFatLardies Advent Calendar for 2024. Nick here, and I've got the privilege of opening this door. Let's see what we've got this time. Very nice, pretty picture behind which it says, Nick, does size matter? When designing a wargame, how does your approach differ when dealing with a skirmish with 40 or so figures and a larger battle? Well, that's quite an interesting question, I guess. Size and scale, does size matter? I think when we say size matters in wargaming, we really talk about it on many levels, not just about the design of the game. I mean, you know, how many players are we talking about? I think from the top, you know, are you looking at a one-on-one skirmish or a sprawling battle, in which case you want 12 players aside? You know, are you commanding a massive army on an expansive battlefield, or are you leading a small squad through a tight encounter? Scale, I guess, influences everything really, from the rules to the experience, and certainly all these games can look fantastic, can't they? Small games, big games. Can be equally appealing to the eye. Alright, so size. Well, let's look at the number of players first. So playing solo, perhaps, or one-to-one has a different dynamic than team play, and, you know, to be honest, whilst many of us enjoy one-on-one games, we also like the social aspect of team-scale games, where we have others to play alongside us. You know, games where players work in pairs or small groups. You get this kind of natural collaboration where you get to discuss tactics and debate moves, and somebody, you know, whispering in your ear. It's like having your very own Ardendorf whispering in your ear during the game. If you're uncertain what should be done next, your colleague can emerge from behind the bookcase and whisper sweet nothings into your ear to give you some ideas about what to do. It's nice to be able to share some of those command challenges, isn't it? I think so. Playing alongside other people, you know, we know that people find that to be socially rewarding, and so multiplayer games are, you know, are something that we focused on really. Certainly in TooFatLardies we have anyway, and it's something most of us like to play. You know, Sharp Practice, Chain of Command, Dux Britanniarum, Bag the Hun, all work well, whether you're using small groups or whether you're upscaling to play with mates. And some games, you know, What a Cowboy and What a Tanker, you know, perfect. What a Cowboy particular for multiplayer fun, as we know. So for some, of course, that social aspect is just as satisfying as rolling dice and moving miniatures. So if we talk about the figures themselves, I mean, miniatures come in different scales. From, you know, we have the commonly loved 28mm, perfect for detailed characters, and what a golden era we are in for fantastic figures. I picked up some figures from Bad Squiddo the other day for our Christmas game. Simply beautiful cast, simple sculpts, beautifully made, nice metal figures, well delivered, excellent packaging. The whole thing is really quite, you know, sensational. And they're not alone. With so much goodness around us in the hobby. The marvellous thing about 28mm, of course, is that, you know, they fit beautifully into the hand, and most of us, even if we're getting on in our years, can paint them to an acceptable standard. Some people, of course, can do them extremely well. But then, as we go down in scale, we go down to the tiny but incredibly practical scales, you know, 3mm, 6mm, 10mm, 12mm, 15mm miniatures that can make massive battles manageable. Chain of Command in 15mm is a really exciting scale to use. You know, the ground scale there is almost a perfect fit, and the table just looks right. And I know that many people like to play Chain of Command in this scale. For me, I'd actually quite like to go up a scale in figures. Not necessarily for Chain of Command, but I've always fancied doing some games using 40mm, or I think that's 1/32nd or 1/35th scale, more or less, isn't it? Something like that. I think the figures in this scale attract me, but the idea of terrain scares me. And of course, as we know, as wargamers ourselves, once you start to go outside your core historical area, you know, terrain can become an issue. especially if, like me, you're absolutely beyond the acceptable limit of storage that's required for this stuff. For me, I guess the feel of the model is as important as its size, and I adore 28mm for infantry and some of those smaller scale games, and in other formats of game too. My 1/1200th Langton Napoleonic naval ships are perfect for fleet battles on a dining room table. The size of the action you're creating, the size of the game you're trying to create, is bounded by the limitations of the tabletop that you're able to put them on. So, and also using these lovely 1/1200th scale ships, I guess, is a return on the investment that I put into making them all those years ago. But if I want to use the larger 1/700th scale Black Sea ships, for instance, well, I either need a bigger table, or I have to accept that my fleet battle is now going to be a squadron skirmish at best, and that of course changes the dynamic of the game. And the obvious conclusion is that big games with big figures need big tables. The practicality of the table space then and miniature scale often determines what's possible. If I dream of creating Gettysburg on a 6x4, I'm going to need to make some compromises. I'm going to be maybe shrinking the action down to perhaps a 6mm figure scale, or choosing a smaller section of the battlefield. I can either reduce the figure size or reduce the size of the bit of the action that I look at. So scale can help us solve logistical puzzles like these, and lets us adapt to real world constraints. And the tables, of course, can still look great. That's the most important thing. The scale of the game also shapes the narrative. The scale you choose shapes the story you tell. The small scale games, so 6mm scale, for instance, emphasize sweeping strategies and the grand drama of commanding armies. Larger scale games like 28mm skirmishes, we have to focus on the individual and like to capture, don't we, often those cinematic moments. So I guess the question that you need to resolve quite early in your game design phase is, look, what are you looking to do here? Are you looking to orchestrate a massive battle, or zoom in on the desperate last stand of a single unit? And that choice ripples into the game mechanics. Smaller scales often use simplified rules to keep gameplay smooth, when dealing with dozens or even hundreds of units. Larger scale games allow us to dive deep into detail. Some special abilities come into the fray a bit more. We can apply less of a broad brush approach and be more specific. So we need to look at perhaps unique actions for each figure, which is something you would do in a gladiator skirmish, but you definitely wouldn't do if you were recreating the attack of the old guard up the hill towards the British line at Waterloo. So here, of course, ultimately is the destination where all these questions kind of lead us to. And that's the question of command. What size of command are you looking to replicate on your tabletop? Because that will dictate the type of game mechanics that you use. It will give you the command perspective for your game. So the challenges of a platoon commander are not the same as the challenges faced by the next level up. They're not the same as the challenges faced by a company commander, by a battalion commander, by a regimental, brigade, division, corps commander, or even army commanders. And of course, if you're only seeing a company on a battlefield, you can't set the player in the corps commander's shoes. Equally, if you're commanding a corps on the table, only a complete crazy lunatic will try to apply command and control down to the level of companies. And what we often see in rules actually is people going 2 levels down. So if it's a core game, you'll often have the smallest unit as a brigade, and if you have a battalion game, you'll often have the smallest level as a platoon. A company level game, you might have the smallest unit as a section, etc. So the games need to cope with that, and they need to cope with that aspect of scale. So yeah, interesting, isn't it? I suppose actually we're talking about figures, but wargaming doesn't always have to mean sticking to figures, does it? You can play with maps and card counters, or even blend scales creatively. So imagine, for instance, if you use 28mm figures on a terrain designed for 6mm. Yeah, sure, it might look unusual, but it could work. And in terms of ground scale, actually, it's no different. You know, the size of the block that makes up the unit doesn't really matter whether the unit's made of cardboard, 6mm figures, or 28mm figures. At the end of the day, scale is about convenience. You know, what fits your table, your budget, and your ability to paint and store the figures. Scale is flexible like that. Do you have the conceptual elasticity? Is that easy for me to say? Do you have the conceptual elasticity to see a block of 20 figures in 28mm and imagine it as a brigade? If it has the same footprint, for instance, as a 6mm brigade, might be the same as 8 28mm figures on a 2x4 base, for instance. Do you need a massive table to spread out every detail of a historical battle? The choices that you face around scale directly impact the experience. So that's all part of, I guess, the same story, isn't it? But that's the beauty of it, I guess. You know, there is no right or wrong scale in wargaming. It's all about the experience you're chasing, and that will impact game design too. Size does matter, but only if you let it. You know, whether you're reliving historical campaigns or crafting your own, fantastical universe, the scale you choose determines how you connect with the game. So the next time you start to pick up a game or dream up your own ideas, just remember it doesn't matter the size of the miniatures. It's about the size of your vision. Are you commanding armies, or are you leading heroes? Are you crafting epic narrative, or are you more interested in intimate stories? I guess ultimately that's the power of scale.